You may think you know where this episode's guest got his inspiration for Sherlock Holmes.
Indeed.
But you'd be wrong.
I didn't say this when we were recording, but when I listen to the podcast, I genuinely forget. I forget it's me. I just sort of think you're just listening to, and you're getting so into it, and then you think, hang on, oh yeah, I remember saying that, blah, blah, blah. Because it's just the speed, the way that they do it, I think it still blows my mind.
Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And listeners like you who support us on Patreon or Substack, sign up for exclusive benefits at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock or ihearofsherlock.substack.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 300. Sherlock & Co.'s Sherlock.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
I'm Bill Curtis. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Now, here are your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder.
Oh, thank you, Bill Curtis. Welcome once again to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, you are my Boswell.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Well, I've got to go down to the Boz and draw a cup of water from that well.
Get to work, will you?
No.
My
I'm trying.
goodness, we're parched around here.
I'm running out of my shirt cuffs. I'm scribbling as fast as I can.
I look forward to your work being publicized. And I will go across London and tell everyone that they should, if they should tire of London, then they tire of life.
Well, you have to wake them up first, I think.
Well, I've got just the thing to put them to sleep. Another episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
No.
Oh, this is going to be a really good one. And for those of you who have looked at the title of the episode, you've figured it out already. We have a special guest today, Mr. Harry Attwell, the actor who plays Sherlock Holmes on the award-winning and acclaimed Sherlock Co. podcast by Goalhanger. You may recall we had Joel Emery, the writer for the show, on episode 275. So how appropriate is this on episode 300 that we mark it with that show's Sherlock Holmes? Should be exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, just a note, if you would like to get all the show notes for this, just check whatever app you happen to be listening to us on, or go to ihearofsherlock.com. You can sign up there for text updates as well. In between shows, we have various items that we may write about, book reviews, discoveries, etc. And if you would like to be notified about that, you can simply sign up for email updates there as well. But of course, wherever you happen to be listening to us now, we'd appreciate it if you subscribed to the show, went back and listened to our archive of some, my goodness, 18 seasons worth of shows. We are now on episode 300, streaming very confidently into the new year in just a month's time. So please join us and have fun while you're at it. Of course, if you'd like to get in touch with us, we are available at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. And if you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can call 1895 221B 5. That's 518-952-2125. Okay, that sounds like it's time for the Sherlockian news. All the news that fits, we talk about. Bert, kick us off here.
Bang! Well, the best place to kick us off is anniversaries, and there's the 40th anniversary screening celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Jeremy Brett Granada series, and that's in the UK. There's a special event at Riverside Studios Sunday, the 15th of December. And this is a joint thing with the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes podcast. Our pals, who we have talked to in the past, are getting together to bring you a special set of screenings celebrating the anniversary of this great Jeremy Brett series. They're going to be showing The Solitary Cyclist and The Devil's Foot, and having a great conversation there. And I wish I could be there for that. It's going to be in London on the 15th of December, and they've got a whole bunch of guests confirmed, including Violet Smith from The Solitary Cyclist, the actress Barbara Wilshire, Gary Hopkins, the writer of The Devil's Foot, costume designer, other actors. It's going to be a lot of fun. I wish I could be there.
Oh, boy. Wow. Well, they keep, Gus and Luke just keep going. They've got wonderful material to work with. And, 40 years on now, sadly, a number of the principals involved with the show are no longer with us. But it's wonderful that they can get some of the folks who still are. So hats off to them. Well, similarly, in the anniversary slot, I want to wish a happy anniversary to our friends at Baker Street Elementary. This was the brainchild of Joe Fay and Steve Mason and Rusty Mason 10 years ago. Kind of a Peanuts-inspired strip of many of the characters we know from the Sherlock Holmes stories as they were children in elementary school or junior school, as folks overseas might know it. It's been a cute strip. It's been a weekly, and we at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere every fortnight have been promoting it. We've been syndicating their thing for 8 years, and crazily enough, have been providing an essay for each one of those. I can't imagine. I haven't gone back to look at 8 years worth of these essays, but that's a lot. That's a lot of essays for these wonderful little strips. So check that out on the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere website. And happy anniversary to Joe, Steve, and Rusty.
Well, and then you may be noticing, if you're looking at the calendar, that the holiday season is approaching. And if you are interested in filling out your Christmas list a little early and suggesting things that you as a Sherlock Holmes fan would like to receive, you could first consult bestofsherlock.com. We'll have a link to these in the show notes, and get a list of terrific Sherlock Holmes books, DVDs, and Blu-ray discs. You can go to MX Publishing, our sponsor, and look at their incredible library of things. And you can get, I think we've mentioned this before, the new 2025 Sherlock Holmes calendar, the daily calendar that's come out.
Yes.
Also, Amazon.com has a great list of Sherlock Holmes gifts. We'll have links to all those things in the show notes.
Love the Sherlock Holmes calendar. And interestingly enough, if we look at the entry for today, which is November 30th, it was on this date in 2010 that Graham Moore's The Sherlockian was first released. And Bert, I don't know if you remember, we spoke to Graham Moore.
Oh, I do.
Way back.
Oscar winner Graham Moore.
Yeah, Oscar winner. That's true. He was all the way back on episode 30. Episode 30.
Wow.
And it was our first episode of season 4. So we'll have a link in the show notes to our interview with Graham Moore, who, interestingly enough, is the the speaker at the BSI Distinguished Speaker Lecture this year.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be great to hear him. He is a creative powerhouse. And folks, you really will enjoy just listening and talking to him. And since we spoke to him, he's just produced so many things. I mean, one of my favorites that he produced, I think he may also have directed it, was a great play with Mark Rylance, the name of which that I can't quite remember, but it was off the top of my head, but he's just produced so much, and he's such a creative force. And it was a great conversation with him.
Well, we should take full credit for his success.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Finally. Well, last piece of news is PBS, Holmes versus Doyle. Popular historian Lucy Worsley is going to investigate the love-hate relationship between Sherlock Holmes and his creator in a 3-part series premiering on PBS in the U.S. on December 8th. Will run each Sunday from December 8th through 22nd. You want to check your local listings for that, but this is Lucy Worsley looking at this, I think what we've come to know in the Sherlockian movement as, fiction meets reality, beginning with episode 1, The Doctor and the Detective. So she'll trace Doyle's early days as a medical student and physician, an unsuccessful physician, and what actually drove him to become a writer.
Yeah, I think the betting on Holmes versus Doyle is 8-2 for favor of Holmes for a TKO in the 3rd round, and I'm going to take a piece of that.
Well, if it's anything like the Jake Paul-Mike Tyson fight, I think it's going to be a snoozer, but this is going to be much better, I can imagine. And for just a note for our dedicated listeners, we have attempted to get Lucy Worsley on the show before, and she hasn't responded to our request.
Wriggles away.
I know. Doesn't she know who she's dealing with here? Or let me put that another way. She knows who she's not dealing with here. Well, I think that about does it for the Sherlockian news. If you have any items of note that you'd like us to include in the news, just shoot us an email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. The holiday season is upon us, and 2024 is almost here, which makes it the perfect time to get over to mxpublishing.com and get yourself or someone you care about a 2024 page-a-day Sherlock Holmes calendar. Following the success of the 4 volumes of A Study in Illustrations by Mike Foy, an interesting collaboration surfaced between Mike and the best-selling Sherlock Holmes novelist and editor Richard Ryan. The result? This unique and fascinating page-a-day calendar that is perfect for Sherlockians. Each of the 366 days of 2024, yes, that's right, you get an extra day next year, features a different image and some quote from the canon, and an On This Day event. What a great way to celebrate Sherlock Holmes every day and be reminded of the timeless canonical influence in our lives. Stock is running low, so hurry and grab yours before they are gone. Get over to MX Publishing in the link in the show notes, and if you mention the code iHoseCal, that's IHOSECAL, iHoseCal, you'll get $5 off. That's an exclusive for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere listeners. The 2024 Sherlock Holmes page-a-day calendar from MX Publishing. Put it on your shopping list today. Harry Attwell trained at Mount View Academy of Theater Arts and graduated in 2004. His theater credits include To Kill a Mockingbird, adapted by Aaron Sorkin, Dr. Watson in The Great Murder Mystery, The Creature and Frankenstein, He was in West End productions of Henry V, The Crucible, and Richard II, and in Broadway and West End productions of King Lear with Sir Derek Jacobi and Hamlet with Jude Law. His films include Maleficent, The Riot Club, Breathe, Love Again, and People We Meet on Vacation, among others. On television, you may have seen him in Da Vinci's Demons, Mayday, The Night Manager, and Curfew. And of course, you've heard Harry, as he's been playing Sherlock Holmes in Sherlock Co. since 2003. Harry Attwell, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Well, it isn't often we ask Sherlock Holmes where he first met Sherlock Holmes, but
In the mirror.
it seems like
I
we
met
should
him in the
start there.
mirror.
Where did you first meet Sherlock Holmes?
Well, I grew up actually an Agatha Christie child because of my mum, her love of Agatha Christie. When we were younger, it was sort of that influence, those TV shows, those books, I suppose, that my sister and myself, we were kind of exposed to first, if you will. And I remember we used to go to the local library on a Saturday morning, and there's a range of children's books called Ladybird in the UK, which are sort of, I don't know, especially children of the 80s like me, you were sort of, they were the books like shortened versions of classics. I remember one of A Tale of Two Cities, which is a lot shorter than Dickens intended, and likewise with The Hound of the Baskervilles. And I remember reading that when I was younger, and in fact before I was coming onto the show today, I Googled the cover, or I Googled the book actually, and the cover is, whatever one came up on Google, is the one that I do remember, and it's this haunting image of the hound or the dog, what you will. And I remember reading that when I must have been, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, something like that. And that, and along with the film, the Young Sherlock from 1985, I think, the Barry Levinson film. That was one that my family, we rented from the local video store, as we used to in those days. And I was aware of the character, and I think in the UK especially, and the world over, as your show proves, it's so ingrained in our history. Just to say to somebody, all right, Sherlock Holmes, if somebody's being a little bit, I don't know, intrusive into your Saturday night, what you got up to, or if you are trying to, pick apart a problem, I think we throw the word Sherlock at people so quickly. And so, like I say, it was always there, always knew about him. Sunday nights in the UK, back in the, again, late 80s, early 90s, the David Suchet Poirot, was such a huge part of television watching. Equally, Jeremy Brett's ITV show, those versions of Sherlock Holmes, we used to occasionally watch. I think my parents watched them, and for whatever reason, I didn't quite catch on to it early on. I, like I say, was really aware of certain stories, especially Hound of the Baskervilles, I have to say. And as I got older, and which I'm sure we'll come to, I was able then, in my 20s, 30s especially, to kind of start to embrace the stories a little more.
And when you saw people like Suchet and Jeremy Brett play the character, what was the path to you to acting? When did you? Were you always sort of a theater kid? When did you sort of make the leap into saying, I like to portray people like that. That looks interesting.
Yeah, lovely question. It was around the same time, I suppose. I went to, my schooling was what you would say is very normal, state schools in the UK. So we didn't really have massive drama departments by any means. So my theatrical kind of bent came from one teacher when I was in my junior school. I can't think what you guys would call that over there, but I was about 9 or 10. And there was a teacher who invited me along to a summer, lunchtime drama classes. And I remembered we did a version of Beowulf, and this is, sort of like a bunch of slightly strange 8, 9, 10-year-olds just being told what to do by this wonderful teacher called Dorothy Walthough, who was very grand and very very different to a lot of the other teachers. It used to be a running joke that if you ever had to take a note to her classroom and knock on the door, depending on if you interrupted a lesson or something, she could be very, very ferocious, shall we say. But she was fantastic and a really wonderful character. And I attended a few of these lunchtime classes, and she, when she retired from the school, through another teacher, passed on a message to me to say that there was a local amateur theatre group, which is in a place called Broadstairs in Kent, southeast England, very close to Dover, Canterbury, that sort of way. And it was a local group which was called the Dickens Players, and every June, I think it is, which still happens these days, there's the Dickens Festival in Broadstairs, which is a week-long festival of lots of events and talks, and there's historical sites where he stayed and lived and worked, and they put on a production every year based on an adaptation of one of his books. And they also did other plays throughout the year, and they were doing, I'm going to remember now, I think it was a double bill. I think it was the Browning version, followed by a play called The Italian Straw Hat, which I can't remember the play right now, but they needed some wedding guests. And I was this young lad in this play as a wedding guest. And I remember being a bit of a mix, really, of sort of terrified, but so enthralled. And it was the people who were in the group. It was... I don't know how to describe them. Like I mentioned Dorothy earlier, there was some wonderful characters, and they were people who I hadn't really come across in my life. My family, I've got my parents and my sister and me were very close, and my dad is retired now, but he was a London firefighter. My mum did amazing different jobs. She worked in hospitals for years, a physiotherapist, and different places. But the upbringing, there was never a sort of somebody within my immediate family theatrical. We did used to go to the theatre quite a lot. We went to pantomimes, and because of my dad's work being based in London, my mum is originally from London as well. So we often visited and went to see West End shows, but predominantly musicals, which I loved. And still love, I have to say. And so it was nice when I was with these people in the amateur theatre group. I was sort of exposed to a group of people who were wonderfully intelligent, wonderfully sort of, some of them very flamboyant, very interesting. And I really sort of latched on, I think, to the lifestyle, what the perceived lifestyle, I think, and wanting to explore that further.
Wow.
And that's a fascinating background, Harry. It strikes me that with a family, well, as non-theatrical as they were, very traditional kinds of employment, yet an appreciation for theater. What was their reaction like when you told them this is the career you wanted to pursue?
Yes, again, a very good question. I have to say, incredibly supportive is what I would like to say as kind of like my title of my answer. I think that they'll be listening to this when it comes out. And thank you. They know how appreciative I am. Deeply thankful to them, because there were times when, before, I remember the exact moment. I was 17. I'd done plays for years. So I'd been doing amateur theatre from about, like I say, 9 or 10. So about 9 years later, I was doing this will sound, I'll try and make this as concise as I can as an answer. It was a local fringe festival, amateur fringe festival. So very, very low key. It was, a reinterpreted episode of a television program which was called Filthy Rich and Catflap, I think, which was on in the UK in the 1980s, I want to say. The same team behind some comedy programs which were on in the UK called The Young Ones and Bottom, starring the amazing Rick Mayall and Ade Edmondson. And anyway, it was basically an episode of this redone without copyright, I'm 100% sure, by some amateur actors. And all I had to do in this thing, this sort of short play, if you will, was get punched, fall to the floor, and I had a sugar glass smashed over my head. And I remember laying there in rehearsals on the floor. This was, probably 9:30 on a Wednesday night. My parents used to drive me to these things before I could drive myself. And so I'd always be aware of if the rehearsal overran, I'd have to go out and apologize for being late coming out. But I remember laying there on the floor, surrounded by this sugar glass, and just thinking, this is brilliant, and like I say, I had been doing it for a number of years, but it was that moment, and I lay there thinking, if I can earn a living doing this, I think I'd be very happy. And that was, when would that have been? Sort of around about 1998, 99, when I kind of made the decision, if you will. And I remember, sort of more or less telling my parents I wanted to be an actor. And as lots of us could appreciate, a lot of your listeners and yourselves, I think it was the time pre-internet, or certainly in our household, there was no internet. And so in order to explore how on earth to become an actor, I had a few friends. I did a couple of youth drama, what would you call them, sort of summers. It was like a summer workshop in Canterbury, in the theatre there called the Marlow Theatre. And it was a group of, I think, 12 to 18-year-olds. And through that, you met people from all different areas. It wasn't just my local area, like my amateur theatre. And through that, I met some slightly older people, 18, 19, who were going to drama school already. And, again, you were sort of, the people going to drama school, it just seemed like, when you knew somebody that was going, it felt so exciting, and you were so sort of G'd on as a 16, 17-year-old, thinking, God, I know somebody that's doing it, that's actually out there and about to go off to drama school. And it felt, I don't know, it felt very exciting. And like I say, those little seeds, once they're planted, I think with lots of professions, with acting, I always say it's a vocation, and it's something in you. It sort of burns a little bit sometimes on the quiet times when you're not acting. It drives you to wait for the next job, and at that age, it was a fire that was sort of forming.
Wow. Well, that's so well expressed, a fire that was forming. I mean, it sounds like, particularly since doing this for so many years, since you were 9 and 10. I mean, it's like you're building up a battery, and as soon as you get to drama school and you have an opportunity to do it professionally, you've just got all this resource and energy and excitement to pull on. What were the early characters that you played? What sort of, when you got the bigger parts? I mean, what was that like? I mean, what sort of stays in your mind about building a character and sort of reveling in that process? And I mean, it's sort of an open-ended question, but I'm just curious.
No, not dumb at all. A lovely question. After school, I went to university. First of all, that was one thing that was my parents. And again, as I say, ignorance is the kind of best word I can use with regards to myself, with what we knew of how to to become a professional actor. So I went to university in Leicester, in the Midlands in the UK, and my course there was very. It was a real mix. It was live art. It was performance art. It was. I'll confess now. I have a tattoo on my left, my left butt cheek, which says "God Save the Queen," and that was for a university piece. That was a piece of live art, which was around royal family and royalty, and it was a course that really, that being a good example, it was a course that made you kind of bend your mind with regards to what is expected of performance, what do we consider performance. Whilst I was at university in the evenings, I found another great local amateur theatre in Leicester called the Little Theatre, which I believe is still going strong. When I was there, that was the kind of, I don't want to say normal theatre, because, what does that even mean? But it was what you would, pros arch theatre. It was rehearsals. It was, we did plays by Tom Stoppard and adaptations of Pride and Prejudice. So, I was kind of doing things which I was used to from my earlier days of amateur theatre. After university, then I went to drama school, and I went to a drama school which was in North London, now has recently moved actually to Southeast London, called Mountview. And, I just did 1 year postgrad. So there are, as you well know, I'm sure there are different courses one can take. It was slightly to do with my age. I was 22, financially. These things, well, this is a real debate still going on in the UK at the moment, but costs of drama schools, costs of even auditioning for drama schools are a hell of a lot of money. And there are people, I would say my background is, well, not from... I don't want to say any. I don't want to disparage anybody. My parents worked really, really hard, is what I'm saying, with regards to making sure that I could get through drama school. And I think I still owe them thousands and thousands of pounds. I am, like I said earlier, deeply, deeply grateful for their sacrifices they made to make sure that I could be there. So through drama training, you had these opportunities of playing. I played Uncle Vanya, and because it was a shortened course, just the year, your courses, you kind of touched on shows or plays such as Vanya very quickly. When I graduated, that was when, obviously then it's so weird. I've spoken to several actors about this, and that first day after graduation is sort of so weird because you're stood there and you're like, right, what do I do now? And I got an agent. I did get an agent quite soon after graduating drama school, sort of through them. It was a time when, again, I think it's very different these days, but you used to write a lot of letters to small theatre companies, small short film makers, things like that. I think it all still exists. Things like that. There's an amazing London Film School, London Film Academy. You used to kind of pop your CV and your headshots off, and you would hope that somebody would get you in. With regards to sort of size of part, I think what's kind of been consistent actually throughout my career, I've had the odd moment where I've played larger parts. And to finally answer your question, bless you, it took a few years, I think, for me to really kind of establish myself in my brain where you feel kind of content. I think for me, I see myself as somebody who, I'm mainly theatre. I do the odd film, the odd telly, but with regards to size of role, I think that a few of the Shakespeares that I did, I played Hamlet, for instance, in 2008, I think it was 2007, 2008, which was in a slightly shortened version. And that was one of the first times that I played a title role, and that was wonderful. And it was from that. It was in a theatre, wonderful theatre in Richmond, in the southwest of London, at a theatre called the Orange Tree, and it's an amazing theatre, really small in the round theatre. I think it must seat about 200, but because it's so enclosed and it's like a cauldron, you're sort of in the stage is bang in the middle, obviously, and playing Hamlet there was really special. And it was from that I started to get seen by bigger theatres, theatres within London. I worked a few times at the Donmar Warehouse, and I was very, very fortunate to be employed in, again, another production of Hamlet, where in London I played a few of the smaller parts, which is always great. I think I played the priest at Ophelia's funeral and a captain and things like that. I also, you understudied. This is another thing which I think is a real key part of my career, and what's led to so many great moments is the parts I've played, but also the parts I've understudied. And in Hamlet, this is back in 2009. I was in Hamlet, as I say, but I was understudying Rosencrantz, and you get to rehearse that at different points, and it was all lovely. The production transferred to Broadway, and it was when we went to Broadway, some of the casting had to change because of a slight rejig. Some people couldn't go, some people had other commitments, and I was bumped up to Guildenstern, so I swapped sort of from Rosencrantz-Brain to Guildenstern, and it was one of those real pinch me moments, because I a year before I'd been doing a lovely version of The Three Sisters. I have to say it was a Chekhov play which I really adore, but that was above a pub. And then it really felt like a year later I was on Broadway and I was playing Guildenstern. And I sort of, it took me a little while for my brain to kind of calculate it. I had a wonderful time over there, over on your side of the pond. And it was just a very odd moment to think, goodness, this is happening. And I'm trying to think of sort of those points where you sort of you realize, it's such a wonderful play, such a wonderful place as well. My goodness, to be doing it over there. And Guildenstern is one of those roles which is niggly, it's tricky. I think it gave me just that oomph, that kind of bit of confidence when I came to slightly larger roles again a few years later. The Crucible, for instance, is an amazing play which I adore. Arthur Miller, and I did a production at the Old Vic Theatre in London in 2014, and that was a real game changer for me with regards to the rehearsal process. We had an amazing, wonderful director, Jarl Faber, who's this powerhouse of a South African director, and she's wonderful. Her visions are very strong, which sounds silly. All directors' visions are strong, of course they are, but the way she pushed you and the fervor that was built up within that production, because the danger, I think, within that production is so prominent, and I think we were really allowed to explore as a cast, and so I'm still very close with people from that show. It was a real play that kind of, it was a great time, when you sort of you look back on it and you think, again, 10 years, and you think, my goodness, it was wonderful. Yeah. So really good. So there's a few in there.
Yeah. Well, you would go on to play Watson on stage, but before that, is this around the time that you were in a play with David Burke, who was, of course, a famous Watson in the Jeremy Brett series?
Absolutely, yes. That was Hamlet. Actually, that was the production of Hamlet, and so that was back in 2009. And David's son Tom Burke is a fantastic actor, and is flying. He's doing wonderful work at the moment, and has been for a number of years. And what I mentioned earlier, actually, the summer drama course I did, one of the people I worked with was Tom Burke, and I played his dad randomly, and so I kind of met David very briefly as a teenager, and I remember going to stay in their flat in London and going to the theatre with David, and just such admiration for the man. And so when the lovely thing, I say this to people often when I work with them, the lovely thing about my job is there are people that you've admired, watched on television, and every now and then you're able to be in a room with them and rehearse and see their process and see how they pick things apart and get to work. And David was one of those people. And I remember him talking, like occasionally he would talk about Sherlock Holmes, and I'll tell a story now, which I hope he won't mind me telling. I remember him. He's a wonderful man, fantastic actor, as we know, but very, very humorous, very dry, very lovely company, a lovely company member as well. And I remember him saying once a story about being in Sherlock Holmes, and it was just as the first series had aired, I think, and or the first few episodes had aired, and he said that he saw somebody approaching him in the street, and with that kind of look of recognition, which happens sometimes with regards to the job, people do sometimes clock you. And this man approached him and said, "Are you?" And I think David, sort of, slightly paraphrasing his brilliant story, but he sort of, puffed himself up, ready to go, yes, I am Watson. And the man said, "Are you our local gas man?" And unfortunately, they thought David was the chap that fixed the gas. And so I think it's a lovely reminder, as is always useful with our career, that never get too bogged down in what one thinks others are going to presume of you. But it was great working with him, and with the history of Watson and the admiration that people hold him in. It's like I say, a real treat to work with these people.
That's a lovely story, and I think it's a great reminder of the difference between a leading actor and a character man. You also had a run-in with another Dr. Watson, future Dr. Watson, perhaps at the time, Jude Law.
Yes, absolutely. Again, very lucky to work with Jude, and that. Well, a number of times. I've worked with Jude 3 times. The first was, again, this production of Hamlet. Jude was a fantastic Hamlet. A number of years later, a version of Henry V, and a film as well called Genius, which is all 3 of the above, directed by Michael Grandage, who's a wonderful theatre actor, theatre director, film director, and he does all sorts of opera, and he's a very talented man. And really lovely to work with Jude several times, but also to see his version. I must confess, I've only seen the second Jude Law and Robert Downey Jr. film, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and it was a long time before I ever came across either character as an actor. And very different take, of course. It's Guy Ritchie. It's what we expect, that sort of ferocity that he throws at it. But really, again, like we say, really, really lovely to cross paths with these people and all kind of have the Sherlock connection at some point.
Well, and it doesn't end there. I mean, your run-in with Dr. Watson also continues, as we mentioned in your bio, in playing Dr. Watson in The Great Murder Mystery. And that, of course, was based on that book you kept referencing in your opening there, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Talk a little bit about what it was like to take on this iconic and stalwart companion of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, it was, well, my first, I remember when the email came through, about the role, and because it was called The Great Murder Mystery, I think when the email came through, it pinged up and I saw the title, and, you scroll down and you go based on The Hound of the Baskervilles. And then it says, we'd love to see Harry for Watson. And, my heart sort of leapt, and it was a real moment of going, my goodness, how amazing to get those opportunities. I think auditions are, if you get those moments of being able to try for these parts, you think, right, I've got to give it the best crack. If it doesn't go any further, I've had a lovely time exploring for the days and weeks leading up to the audition. And for me, you spoke, in fact, to one of my former colleagues on that job, Luke Barton, the wonderful Luke Barton, who played Sherlock in that version as well back in the summer. I remember hearing his episode of your show, and with Luke and with the others, we formed a very concise version of Hound of the Baskervilles. It was I was very fortunate in the sense I just played Watson sort of throughout the play, whereas others, Luke included, sort of doubled and trebled at different points in order to contain the story in its essence. So when you read the script, it read brilliantly. It read sort of very, it was, what would you say, sort of obviously moments, as is always the way with adaptations, things have to be slightly sort of streamlined, but it really contained the essence. And for me, with Watson, I remember saying in my audition with the director, it was, Watson has those moments, I think, where we must remember his army background, the damage that's done. I think, I'll come back to this later, I think, when we talk about sort of me as Sherlock, but with regards to Watson, he's been at war, and he's struggled, and there is that real, it's the same when you sometimes, you watch older World War I, World War II films, and everything's kind of brushed off a little bit with regards to the mental impact that these conflicts have had on people, and it would have been no different for Watson. And I think to see comrades and friends fall, to be injured as he is, to carry that weight, I think that was one thing that I really wanted to get across. Was I didn't want it to just be stiff upper lip, off we go type of Watson. I wanted there to be a depth to him beyond there were moments that we did allow into that show where he's trying to, impress when Dr. Mortimer comes to visit, and there's the moment at the beginning with the wonderful telling of the fable, of the story, the history of the Baskerville clan. There was moments in our version where Watson was a little bit trying to prove, I can do this too, when obviously Sherlock is brilliantly working things out. But as we got later and deeper into the story, I think Watson's isolation in that place, sending off these letters, not knowing, where Holmes is and what he's up to. No spoilers, but I think most of your listeners will know exactly what Holmes was up to. But I really felt when Holmes reveals himself and kind of comes to Watson and explains, what he's been up to before they continue to finish. In our version, Watson really kind of was allowed to have the fear. I think the genuine fear, it sort of admitted his emotional moments that weren't going to be hidden, and I think we made that clear in our production that it was a hard thing for him to face, a hard place for him to be with Holmes' sort of revelation. I've been here all along, and it's in ours. Watson got annoyed, that sort of annoyance of, my God, why didn't you trust me? Why couldn't you believe in me? And I always wanted to get the truth of of Watson. His loyalty, I think, between the two of them is such a lovely pairing in literature. And I think one which is, going back to Agatha Christie, I think when you look at Poirot and Hastings, of course you've got exactly that sort of bond, and her influence, I'm sure, coming from Watson and Sherlock Holmes. And I think it was one thing that I really wanted to make sure was that Watson wasn't just the sidecar, if you will. He had his depth and he had his strength.
See, it's wonderful. You've got this toolkit in the character of Watson, because you know him to be, as you say, injured army soldier, seeing comrades fall. And, you can approach the character and say, this is, and you put it well when you said, you want to show the depth of Watson and not just the superficial character. But when you came to play Holmes, it's a different sort of thing, because you don't have, we just have no backstory about Holmes. He's just sort of there with these powers, this world. I mean, you've certainly seen other interpretations of Holmes, but how did you approach creating the character of Holmes for Sherlock Co, which is, just voice acting? I mean, you've got to do so much, with your voice, obviously, in that sort of environment. What went through your mind when you said, "Gee, now I'm going to play Sherlock Holmes, and I'm going to be doing it basically on the radio"?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that comes across, is that responsibility. I think in your brain, same as the mindset I had with Watson, and a number of years ago, another play I did was Frankenstein, and played the creature. And I think that was again a part where you go, my goodness, people have got a real idea of what they think this thing is with regards to the creature, and what he may be with regards to Sherlock Holmes. When Adam Jarrell, who is one of the creators of Sherlock Co, along with Joel Emery, who's been on your show, Joel, and they approached me. It was quite a while before the first episode came out. It was around about, let me think, maybe 6. No, goodness, it was longer. It was almost a year and a half, I would say, from their initial sort of contact with me, and to actually getting everything formed. We had a few test runs of episodes. We basically had to audition. I've known Adam for a long time. Adam and I used to work front of house at a theatre in London, and we used to sell ice creams together and tear tickets and show people to their seats, as is the actor's way. An evening job is always very useful. And Adam and me, we always got on. Our humour, and we mucked around a little bit on that job and had lots of fun. And we stayed in touch, but not to the point of daily contact or anything. And so when Adam rang me one day and just said, I knew about Adam and Joel's previous shows through their wonderful company, Holy Smokes, which is their production company. They'd done Jackie the Ripper, which was a brilliant reinterpretation of the Jack the Ripper fable, and or story or history. Unfortunately, not a fable. Alas, it is history. Their version of that, and The Offensive, which was their weekly football/soccer podcast, which they did. And again, real admiration for what they were doing. And I'd recorded a couple of little tiny parts for The Offensive. I think I played a lawyer and a couple of little bits. And Adam just rang me one day and said, we're doing a Sherlock Holmes podcast, comedy drama podcast. And in my brain, I was thinking, he'll say, could you do this, or could you play so-and-so? And he said, we'd love you as Sherlock. And, it's that moment of sort of going, how wonderful. And then you also go, oh God, we're going to do this. And I, as I said about auditions, I felt like, yes, I know Adam and have met Joel before, we a long time ago, but there was no definite in my head. So I thought, well, I've got to try and get this right. And I wanted Sherlock to be, again, real and grounded and somebody that we can relate to. But as you said, he's got these I don't know, powers is a strong word, but he's got this intellect, he's got this intelligence, he's got these ways that he looks at things very different to anyone else usually in the room that he stood in. And I think what I wanted to make sure is he could come across as approachable, personable. I didn't want it to be that uptight, sort of with a guard up. And as you say, because it's all just oral, people are just going to be, wonderfully, people are listening. And that's the brilliant thing. And we'll come back to this later, but our fan base for Sherlock & Co has been incredible. And the response has been incredible as well for the show. And I wanted to make sure, of course, every time you deliver these lines, which I think Joel touched on this, the way that we record Sherlock & Co is we are alone. And I record with my laptop and my microphone in my wardrobe. I have a shelf in my wardrobe. I set up my microphone. I get a big glass of water to my side and I lock myself away in the spare bedroom. My wife, very patiently, and the cats sit in the lounge and keep the television down low when I'm recording. And you do the line several times. You're reading the scene. You're trying to sort of. The longer the show goes on, I can hear the style, of course. Paul Waggett, who's my amazing Watson, and Marta da Silva, who plays Mariana in the show. I can hear them now. I can sort of. You can start to kind of piece together how the scene sounds. Whereas at the beginning, for the first 16 months when we were recording completely cold, you never heard it back. You never heard like a practice episode or anything like that. We never got together. So it was a real thing of going, I need to get these lines right. So you were able to record several times. I think Joel said this actually when you guys spoke to him. I started off, shall we say, a little bit cautiously, and I might have sent maybe too many interpretations of some lines. There's only so many ways you can shout yes or no, but you wanted to make sure the options were there, for the guys to be able to edit it together. And when the show first came out last year, and I heard the first episode, you sort of go, how on earth have they done this? Because Paul Waggett, who is brilliant Watson, he lives in New Zealand and I live in Whitechapel in East London. And, we're all scattered. We're scattered. And the way that they do the production, the sound, it's amazing. And so the more it goes on, the more I try to make sure I never lose that essence of what I originally felt about him. Keep him grounded, keep him real, but with an edge. He's got that. He's got a shine about him. And I think, it's something to be aware of, especially in a character which is so well known.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting here is kind of a dichotomy or actually two elements I'll draw on and see how you respond, Harry. One, you're working, as you say, alone. Horribly alone in your wardrobe. When you just described what I heard as a lot of passion and a lot of joy from working in an ensemble cast on stage, where your natural energy comes from playing off of your colleagues there. And obviously that's impossible in the current setup. Similarly, you described this evolution of your comfort in the role and with how it would sound and knowing how your colleagues have sounded. And it's almost parallel to how Conan Doyle wrote the stories. In the beginning, he had no concept as to how Holmes and Watson would interact and how their relationship would evolve. And over the course of 40 years, he had a certain level of comfort in writing these two characters. And we saw the friendship and the collegiality between these two men evolve. And it seems like that it kind of took root and sprouted in your own interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I think it really is a different way of working. And I haven't done a lot of radio over the years, bits and pieces, but predominantly the times I have done voice work or radio work, you've got the interaction, at least with the sound engineer, with the director in the other room, through the pane of glass sort of thing, or the other actors, stood around. It takes sometimes, I have to say, depending on your your creative flair that particular day. I think what's fascinating for me as an actor, especially with theatre, there's a real sense sometimes. I get slightly annoyed sometimes if you're doing a hard play. Every play has its challenges, but if you're doing a real slog, like the Crucible, say, over 3 hours, a real sort of slog that goes through on a matinee day, sometimes you can feel the energies a little bit down, or people presume it's going to be down. I've got friends that say, I won't book the matinee because the actors won't be on it. And you go, my God, if you knew how many actors would kill you for saying that, because every show you're going to give your best and you're going to give your all. And that's part of our job, is to dig deep on those days where I don't know, you've got a financial trouble, your boiler's broke. We all have these things that happen, and yet you've got to carry on. That's the point. People are going there to be entertained. They don't care if you're slightly lackluster. The same with Sherlock. If I'm having a day, or if I'm sort of set aside my time, I find Sunday mornings, they're very quiet in the local area, so my neighbours are very quiet, which is useful. But also it gives me, I love waking up early on a Sunday. I'll have a coffee ready, and then I'll head into the spare room, like I say, shut the door, and just start each scene as it goes. And it takes sometimes, if I'm having a bit of a loosey-goosey moment, or I'm not feeling particularly, I don't know, like I've nailed something, I'll listen back. I will kind of run back over what I've done, and as I mentioned earlier, I've got better, I think, at kind of trusting in myself that yes, that was right for that bit. With the long speeches, as Sherlock has at points, of course, with regards to the denouements, if you will, or the end of the episodes, there's the tying up and getting everything sorted. They're the ones that, for me, I'll have a good run through, looking at them before I start, get going. And then if I fluff or if I make a mistake, I try not to get too annoyed, because you go, it's good because you've had a chance, you've had a crack at it, and you're sort of spending a lot of time in your own brain, but also because it's out loud. I can hear him coming out. My Sherlock is there, and like I say, I can rewind the little bits that I've recorded on my computer, listen back, and go, no, not quite there, or you start to notice the tiny little fluffs, and or gabbling, or not quite. Just not quite right sometimes, and you send it off, and of course, Joel and Adam are wonderful writer and directors. They will come back every now and then. They'll send, can you re-record this? Can you do this? That doesn't quite match up with what we're looking for. And it gives you just that little bit of input when you are alone. Like you said, that relationship on stage, the relationship with the audience, let alone with the other actors, is so vital. And for this, it's almost you construct it yourself. Sort of, I can hear, like I said, Paul and Marta in my brains. And the few times that I have Adam, our director, he has joined me several times. I think maybe 2 or 3 episodes, because it's slightly social. It's nice to see him. So the times I've recorded with him, it becomes a different dynamic, because then it's nice not being alone, and he does give me the inputs. And so those few times that I've been with him, again, I've been able to glean his directing style, how he sometimes likes certain bits done. And so when I'm on my own, which is the majority of the time, again, I sort of think, what would Adam think? What would Joel think? And try to kind of meet myself in the middle with regards to, hypothesizing usually.
Hey, do you ever think there will be an opportunity for the entire cast and crew to come together and record in one physical space?
I really hope so, yes. What we're all hoping with regards to this, the plan is to complete the canon, and so we've got a long way to go. I counted earlier, I think I've got this right. I think we've done, or at the time of recording, shall we say, that we're currently speaking, we are on the Sign of 4, and the Sign of 4 is our first attack of a novel, first go at one of the longer stories, and that's in 10 parts, and so we have, including the Sign of 4, we've done 21 of the stories, or larger stories, if you will, which has equated to only 61 episodes. And we think how many more there are to come. We're talking, hopefully, if people keep listening and enjoying the show as they have been, we're talking for a number of years. And so it would be lovely for us all to be able to be together and actually, look at each other when we're saying some of these lines, and the Paul's. It's wonderful when, again, I can listen to these. If I can, well, not deviate slightly, but some of my loves with regards to what I listen to when I'm washing up, when I'm cooking. I love to listen to audio dramas when I'm cooking, and I adore, let alone, of course, the Clive Merrison Sherlock Holmes. I've got all of those downloaded. I've got Stephen Fry's Sherlock Holmes recordings are downloaded, but I've also got an amazing series called Charles Paris Mysteries, which stars Bill Nighy, and they were on BBC Radio, and you can get the whole collection, I think, now. And I can listen to those, and I do listen to those, I must confess, over and over. And there's something really comforting about hearing brilliant murder mysteries or stories, whatever they may be, but hearing them done so well. And I do listen back to the Sherlock & Co stories. I sometimes just dip into a random episode when I'm walking into central London, or if I'm going for a walk in the park, I'll just listen to an episode, especially just before I'm about to record another one, and try to get that voice back, listening to our Sherlock, especially the more recent ones, just to kind of, there's been shifts, there's been slight changes, I'm sure, since the beginning, because of that relationship between Watson and Sherlock, and that natural progression that happens within a working and a friendship. Those relationships, they do progress, and I think the idea of hearing us all together in one room, the way that they somehow, Adam and Joel, make it happen, it does, it's like it's there, but to actually do that, if and when the time comes, I think I'll probably cry, if I'm honest with you. I often cry, chaps, at random things these days. I think it's my age. And I will probably be very emotional, but it will be very exciting if it can happen.
Well, it's something of it really is a miracle, putting Sherlock & Co. together. And no wonder, you've got this great fan base and so many people excited about the program. I can imagine if you ever staged a live recording, you would probably cheerfully fill a theater of happy people who would be just delighted to watch you and the cast at the microphone, doing everything live. Of course, it's quite a different proposition. But that's magnificent. What do you think about Holmes? I mean, you describe him so well. You want to make him real and approachable, and I think that's one of the lovely hallmarks of your character, because it's not at all a caricature, and it's so easy to caricature him as sort of an adult drug addict and a sociopath and this, that, and the other thing. But you make him real, approachable, and yet observant and talented. So you've really built the character for the 21st century. I think it's just so lovely. What do you think about him? Somebody once said, I can't remember who it was, that if he's the last person on earth I would want to have dinner with.
Yes, perhaps. I think he might be very picky as well, especially in our version. He eats penne pasta and little else. He's very specific about his choices of what he likes to eat. He does like ice cream, I have to say. That came up in an episode recently. I think, and actually, I'll reference your wonderful program again, your amazing show, because you did a great episode which I listened to recently about neurodivergence, and I think what we cannot escape, and we have not escaped, and one of our key things, if I think I'm talking correctly for our show, for Sherlock & Co, is to totally embrace the fact that Sherlock is neurodiverse. We live in a time now, 2024, where we are so much better at really kind of asking each other, how are you? It's a very British thing, which we all joke about over here. We say, how are you doing? And somebody goes, yeah, no, I'm all right. And then you move on. That's kind of it. Yes, I'm all right. That's fine. It covers a multitude of how you're feeling, but we do that. And it doesn't mean that every time you grab a friend, you have to really hold them by the shoulders and say, no, tell me exactly how you are. But the option is there, I feel, these days, especially within workplaces. Some people, I won't lie, there are times when you can see eye rolls and you can see people go, oh God, we've got to tick these boxes nowadays. And you go, well, yeah, thank goodness we do tick these boxes with regards to how people are, how people's mental state can alter on the flip of a coin. And I think in the past we have been very quick and still are. I won't say we're the other side. By no means are we. But as a society, as a globe, I think and I hope we're getting a lot better at going, that person is the way they are, and that is the way they are. And let's explore why they are like that, as opposed to going, no, that's not quite what we want. Change, please. And I think we looked at Sherlock, talking about Sherlock, and trying, for me, to sometimes get such an innocence in his. For instance, in Sherlock Co, often Watson will reference a cultural figure, a popular cultural figure, because our show is modern, and it's almost on the day that often the day that the show is released is the day that Watson's saying, I'm signing off on this recording. So he's kind of, or the day before, so it's very up to date. So we'll sometimes be able to reference very local issues, or the general election that the UK had a few months back, things like that. So we keep it very current. And Watson will often mention a film star. There's an episode where Sherlock rings up an acting agent and asks for Thomas Cruise, because he's never heard of Tom Cruise. So he presumes he has to, just ask for it in a little bit more of a formal way. So he asks for Thomas Cruise, and the person on the end of the phone very quickly hangs up, I have to say. No spoilers there. But he doesn't follow certain things, but what he does follow, Sherlock, is a real sense of justice, and if he sees things, hears things, and notices something which is off, then he'll grab it. I think what Joel, both of them write the scripts. They do. Joel, I think, has peppered so many of the scripts with lovely moments where there'll be a list of, there's this, are you interested in this? Are you interested in this? And as Watson kind of passes over something that he would think would be very boring to Holmes hears something, senses something in this description of a possible case, or perhaps something to pursue, and he grabs hold of it. And I think it's those little sort of prongs that stick up at the back of his neck and just go, hang on, there's something there. He takes his time. I think he is very, very brusque sometimes. I think, again, that's part of his way. He sort of wants to get to the crux of the matter, or to the root of the problem. And by doing so, he's very brusque, and he's very, very, I won't say rude. I'll say he's very speedy sometimes in looking for his responses, and
efficient.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely efficient. Like my interviewers are. Sorry, your guest is rambling, but yeah, precisely. He's very efficient. Wants the problem solved, and by getting there can sometimes, yes, be a little bit tricky. But that's, like I said, that's his way, and I think that's what we've really discovered with our fan base. And I'll give them a shout out if I can, because they are. I've been overwhelmed. One thing there are so many things I have to say with this job that I wasn't expecting, and I really, really wasn't expecting the kind response, the global response. I get messages on Instagram from people in India, Brazil, the States, just passing on their admiration of certain episodes, or how we've covered a certain theme or something. And I just wasn't expecting it. It was just, like I said, it was a wonderful job that came up. And then all of a sudden people are saying, we had a meet and greet actually back in May, I think it was, which was, I think about 100 of fans came to a thing, and it was myself there, and Joel and Adam and some of our other producers. And these people came in, this amazing mix of people, especially young. There's a real young, wonderful group who gifted lots of bracelets, and like you see at Taylor Swift concerts, they gave me so many bracelets with Sherlock written on Sherlock and Co. We love Mariana. It was overwhelming to have that sense of the impact that I think having Sherlock Holmes portrayed in a way where some of these young people can really relate to, and their parents had brought them, and they said, I've only just started listening to it because my child has said, we love it, and they wanted to kind of, be able to listen into what their kids are listening to, and it was really overwhelming. Yeah, really lovely to know that my interpretation of Sherlock has been able to touch a lot of people, or be relatable. I think that's one thing with a character like him, to be able to kind of relate, to him in whatever guise it may be, is really important.
Yeah, and I think this is a thing we've seen from our perch over the years is that every generation has its own Sherlock Holmes. The characters, although they are fixed in place and time, they're very real for the moment. Conan Doyle was writing for the present day, his present day. And for that reason, and because he was such a great storyteller and made things so, as you said, real, approachable, etc., people confused Sherlock Holmes with an actual living figure, even though he was just a figure of literature. And what we're seeing here, and I think we talked to Joel about this, in Conan Doyle's time, the serial, as it was published through the Strand magazine, the monthly publications of short stories, and then, of course, the serial element of The Hound of the Baskervilles as it was rolled out issue after issue of the Strand. What you've got now with the podcast is a modern version of that exact same thing. And this blurring of we're listening to a podcast about a podcaster or, about a podcast being made. The lines are blurring. And I think what you just described about the fans, yes, they understand it's a show, but it also it translates to that correspondence that Conan Doyle saw even back then, when people would write to Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street as if it were a physical address. And lather, rinse, and repeat. It keeps going on. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the similarities. I want you to, perhaps expound upon this, Harry, and talk about the differences as well with the BBC Sherlock, the modern day, televised films with Benedict Cumberbatch, where, the same kind of core story is updated to modern day. Talk a little bit about your perhaps inspiration, perhaps how you wish to diverge from that version, because every time I hear your voice and I hear Paul's voice, I immediately think of Martin and Benedict.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I've started smiling, which you can't see obviously on the podcast, but that because it's a lovely thing to think. Again, it's the wonderful world that we're in for these different portrayals to be kind of compared. I find it it is fascinating. What I will start with, which is slightly controversial, I've never seen an episode of Sherlock. I've never seen it. It wasn't sort of. I don't know whether I was in the theatre or whether I was doing other jobs or anything. When it was on television here, I was never home, or I never tuned in, and so I've never seen Cumberbatch's version. And I remember when we were first aired, when we first came out as a podcast, there were comments that cropped up. I think somebody saw them, or I don't go digging around too much in the comments, but I had seen that people had said how similar. Firstly, how similar I sounded, but as you say, rightfully so. Of course, it's a modern retelling of these stories. So I'll try and cover both of those things. Firstly, with regards to my performance and Benedict Cumberbatch's, I think. I don't know how to phrase this. There's only so many ways, I suppose, a slightly well-spoken cis man can portray a certain sort of angle on things or come across, and I think we hold a similar there's a similar quality, of course there is, to our voice, but I think what is expected of kind of actors sometimes you couldn't sort of portray him too differently, or we haven't chosen to portray him too differently than perhaps could be echoed from before. But that's down to his style, like the character's style of delivering things, of his responses. I think obviously that sometimes with both shows, I think certainly with ours, we take the actual words that Sherlock did say, and his certain speeches and things are direct sort of verbatim copies of what was said in the stories, and so it's ultimately goes back to the root of the character. We're portraying him, but with this voice, this voice, you can't sort of escape it after 43 years that I've had it, and it's sort of changed over the years. And I think with I've never. I've of course I've heard Benedict Cumberbatch speak as a person in interviews, and I've seen him do other things, but I certainly have never heard him do Sherlock, and I've also not ever tried to emulate him. And our version compared to theirs, like I say, I can only talk from the conversations I've had with Joel and with Adam about this, and also with friends. From what I understand, obviously we're carrying on through the whole lot. I know they did a number and fantastically well and brilliantly, and so many friends and colleagues that I've worked with have been involved in that show, and hats off to the success that it had. And I think it really gave another lovely boost for a new version. That's the thing. It's these new versions, as you said, different generations will sort of have certain people in mind, and I think it sort of makes sense that people want to do it. It's bringing these stories forward. It's making similarly with Elementary, the John Lee Miller and Lucy Liu series, which again I've never seen, but I've wanted to dip in and out of just to kind of see how these people do these things. See how the stories are reinterpreted. Different audiences will take what they want from each of them, and I'm intrigued by the comparison. So I think when we do finish, or maybe even before, I think I'm sort of bedded into my Sherlock very well by now. So maybe at Christmas I'll treat myself to looking one of them up and seeing how he does things. But I'm not sure if that quite answered your question really. But it's a very interesting thing to think. Yeah, how many people do go, gosh, did you listen, or have you tried to sort of formulate a version? And it's purely through I think my circumstances at the time just never ever caught the show and have never come back to it. So at some point I definitely should.
Well, it's just completely uncanny then.
Absolutely, it is. I could maybe have it as a market. If things get quiet, maybe I could try and do phone calls or things like that, pretending to be it.
No, I think it's very intelligent of you not to go seeking those things out. I mean, there are all sorts of stories about writers who, when they're writing stories, they make a point of paying attention to not reading other authors that they like for fear of emulating their style. Because you've created a character here that's really different. And with Holmes, it's happened over the years. I mean, he was filmed with actors like Isla Norwood, and then Arthur Wantner, and then Clive Brooke and Basil Rathbone. And he was sort of reinvented at every age. It wasn't until the 1930s they began to film him in a Victorian setting. And then you had, Rathbone's acting style, and then you had Peter Cushing and Robert Downey Jr. And, everybody sort of reinvents the character. And just because, the BBC Sherlock brought him to the contemporary time, that's a great jumping off point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying that. I remember actually from the meet and greet back in May, I think somebody asked me about a process or how I do things. And when Jeremy Brett, again, I do watch some of those, I have to say, on a Sunday morning or when I'm not recording or when you've got a bit of time, you think, what should I watch? The joy of television these days, of course, we can, on demand is a bizarre setting where you do your own television guide these days, as opposed to looking through the magazine to see what's on. You think, hang on, what do I want to watch right now? And it's his posture, and this sounds strange in a way because of course no one sees me, but obviously when I'm reading the lines, when I'm doing the big speeches, especially, my hands are going. You have to be careful not to knock the microphone, as I'm trying to do right now, and make sure I don't have anything sort of like a clicky shirt or a rustly jumper. But I love Jeremy Brett's posture, his poise. I think he sort of, he lifts his head. He's got that very arch sort of appearance, and to kind of go completely the other way. One of the other people who I do sometimes imagine I'm almost emulating is the wonderful performance of Tim Curry in the film Clue. Clue I adored as a child, and I still watch at least 3 times a year. I know it word for word, and it's one of those films that I go back to. There are times for me when Sherlock is really going for it, in our version, when he's really going for it. Clue and Tim Curry's portrayal as Wordsworth the butler, he he has this sort of very, it's very sensible and very serious at points. Of course, it's a wonderful farce, but he has this way of delivering things, and I can hear him in the back of my mind. So if there's any amalgamation of copying, because I think actors, it's often said you pick. We glean from other performers what we like, and perhaps we store them away for the next whatever it may be. And for me, if I'm going to combine anybody, it might be Tim Curry, Clue, and Jeremy Brett as I'm delivering the lines. That they're the two kind of physical influences, despite it being something that we listen to as opposed to watch.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, fabulous. Tim Curry.
I would have never considered that, and yet Clue is a favorite of mine as well. It's in that spirit of obviously the murder mystery and echoes of Neil Simon's Murder by Death, where it's half farce, half mystery.
Absolutely.
And I think that speaks to the fun that you're having here, and people usually don't think of Sherlock Holmes as a character imbued with any kind of sense of humor or mirth, and yet, as a working actor, these are some of the things you need to, kind of bring to your of yourself. You bring to the character, but not overtly, and I think that energy and the fun that you have with each other, even though you're alone in a room or alone in a closet. It comes through.
Good. Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that. Thank you. It's I have to say I would doff my cap or my dear stalker, if you will, to Joel and Adam, because when we're recording, as I said, whether it's twice or 3 or 4 times, if you're trying to get a certain line right, you'll change the intonations, you'll change the delivery, you'll change depending on what's happening. For me, the most difficult things, and I've said this to Adam and Joel, is the running scenes. We often are chasing somebody or being chased, and you're sat there trying to do this running scene in a chair, whilst legging it along, reading lines, trying not to knock things over in the wardrobe. So it can be tricky, but you'll deliver these lines in a couple of ways. And then, as I said, we send them off, and it really, I think they're masters there. They've made this show because they can hear, they know what they want. They know what through line they want throughout the scene, the arc of the scene, or the whole story. As I say, with Sign of 4, it's 10 parts, and to try and keep people with us for 10 parts, let alone the 4 parts. Say, I think Silver Blaze, it was a 4-parter, which was our first 4-parter, I think, or our longest at that point. And for the guys to keep that energy and to keep the scenes flowing, because as we know, our attention span as modern people is very different, because we've got so many distractions. Our phone can ping, we've got all sorts going on. To have that knowledge that people are listening, are able to listen whilst they're on their commute to work, whilst they're there's a lovely guy, one of the people I met at the meet and greet, who is a postman, and he listens on his rounds in the morning, and I love that. I love the fact that we all do that, and as I said, I do that myself with audio dramas whilst I'm cooking and clean, and thus clearing up the kitchen. I really enjoy the fact that people are able to do that with our show, and Joel and Adam somehow every week they keep this show so alive and fizzy with I don't know, chases and gunfights and tuk-tuk. We've just had a tuk-tuk chase in Delhi, I think, in Sign of 4. They do it so well. It's wizardry with the sound effects and everything. It's so clever.
Now, here's another thing that I've wondered about, Harry. With various interpretations of Sherlock Holmes, I think different actors have brought a signature to the role. And it could be something physical. William Gillette on stage, of course, introduced the curved pipe, which just became part of the legend around Sherlock Holmes. We saw the off-brand tweed cap that Basil Rathbone used to wear that became associated with him. Jeremy Brett and kind of the brooding look, the pursed lips, the way he made his eyes work the scene. And I've noticed with you, and maybe this is just me, but one thing I've picked up as a signature of your Sherlock Holmes is the use of the word indeed. Is how much of that is you versus how much of that is the writing staff?
I would say entirely the writing. Yes, indeed, and good God, they're the two that people have asked me to say, completely out of the blue or record on somebody's voice note for them and things like that. I think. Indeed, yeah, it seems to, depending on the circumstance, but it sort of can sometimes seem to last about 10 seconds, that one word. And other times, I think Sherlock sort of, uses that one to sometimes agree in a slightly, not always unkind, but, it's sort of, if Watson's made a slightly silly suggestion or something, it can be that sort of, indeed, or with passion, with gusto, and such as we've retained the game is afoot, and which is this odd phrase, and I think it was picked up really early in one of our episodes where Watson, I think, is like, that's not a real phrase, and he goes, yes, of course it is, and then it's sort of established. It's like, right, this is what we're gonna own this one, and I think if indeed is my mantra, I quite like it, but that's down to Joel and his writing. I think I will let him certainly take the credit for that.
Oh, well, but you deserve some credit for that too. I mean, these are empty boxes, empty bottles, these words, and they need to be filled up with attitude and message and reaction and personality, and that's what you bring to it. Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you so much. It really is a treat, and it's
Harry. That's where you say "indeed."
Indeed.
Indeed.
Shall we do a retake? No. We'll keep it as it is. That shows how much I rely on the writing. You see, curses.
Wonderful. So obviously, you've got 39 canonical stories left to record here years into the future, which is a wonderful thing for your pension, I'm sure. But what else? What else are you working on right now? What should we look for Harry Attwell in?
Well, bits and pieces. It is that strange thing, as always, with the profession. It comes and goes, is my phrase. And I have just done a film which is called People We Meet on Vacation, which is a lovely rom-com story. It's an adaptation of a novel, and I think that appears on Netflix next year. I won't say my role in that is enormous. It's nice every now and then to have a cheeky little guest star. So we'll say, yes, eyes peeled for People We Meet on Vacation. There's a TV show which is called Curfew, which has recently been released, I think, over here. Probably, I'm not sure whether they release these things. This is on Paramount Plus. It's a great premise. Curfew is this dystopian future where, well, not that far into the future perhaps, but men are curfewed between 7 a.m. in order to try and make the streets safer. And we can argue about that in a different podcast. But I play a small, rather creepy role in that one, and that's recently been released, I think. And we wait. I think I've said this to the guys, to Joel and Adam. One thing I didn't really think about with regards to Sherlock & Co. is its consistency has really just been lovely. It has been what I would say with, its acting, it comes and goes, and it's been a bit of a quiet year, I won't lie, with regards to theatre. Say, I did a wonderful production of To Kill a Mockingbird, which was in London, in the West End, which finished last year. And you're always waiting, you're waiting for the next theatre thing, or you're waiting for the next job. And to have the consistency of Sherlock recording every couple of weeks has been wonderful. So I sort of look forward to the email that comes through with the next script as much as I do the next project, because it's lovely to have that as a constant.
Oh, lovely. Well, I suppose in your free time you can engage in probably what's necessary at this point and get a God Save the King tattoo on your other butt cheek.
Exactly, to be very topical. Yeah, indeed. My views are a little bit different. I'm a little bit more of a Republican these days, but again, that's for a different podcast.
Fair enough. Well, Harry Attwell, it has been an absolute joy to have this dialogue with you, and equally, it is a joy to hear you every week on Sherlock & Co. Thank you so much for being here with us on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you. Honestly, it's been a real honor to be a part of it. And as I've said to you guys, I'm a real fan of the show. So to be a part of your canon is fantastic. So thank you so much for having me.
What a joy, and what a terrific conversation to hear the joy in Harry Attwell's voice. I just love talking to people who are joyful about what they do. And can you imagine how much fun it would be to be in a company working with Harry Attwell?
Oh my gosh.
And the work here is so great. He's created in his character of Sherlock Holmes a Holmes that's approachable and very different. And they've done such interesting things in Sherlock and Company. They've created a Holmes who, among other things, friends, puts marshmallows in his tea. Now, if you could do something like that convincingly with Sherlock Holmes, you deserve an award. But it's just so much fun to talk to him. And he's, earlier on we mentioned Graham Moore as a creative powerhouse. Harry is a creative powerhouse. It's just a lot of fun.
Really is. And I was surprised, I think I can say, that to know that Harry hadn't watched any of the BBC Sherlock before, and interestingly gives us a similar kind of Sherlock, and yet still manages to put his own signature on it. And I think with his Sherlock, what's wonderful about it's more of a joyful Sherlock. Yeah, marshmallows and everything, but he also appreciates warm hugs. And, isn't the sociopathic kind of Sherlock, the cold and unattached one that we had before. He's just a Sherlock who's been inhabiting his own world and is still interested in the world around him, even though he is highly focused on what he wants to accomplish. So it's going to be fascinating. Just watch this or listen to this series continue to build over the next 3 years. What a wonderful gift for us to have. It's A Chance of Listening with your correspondent, Madeline Quiñones.
Hello, everyone. I'm Madeline Quiñones, and today I'm here to attempt to talk about the wackiest, wildest Sherlockian podcast out there, Sherlock Holmes is Real. The show is a mockumentary, a fake documentary, started by Brad Kefauver in 2017. It posits exactly what its title says, that Sherlock Holmes is real, or was real, and also that Sherlockian societies have been trying to cover up that fact for decades. Oh, and the BBC is in on it too. The show originally features, Alan King, whose voice sounds strangely familiar as the lead conspiracy theorist. Alan is eventually replaced by his brother, Talon King, as well as by certified real person, Paul Thomas Miller. Talon and Paul take up the idea that the 1950s TV series with Ronald Howard and Howard Marion Crawford is real documentary footage of Holmes and Watson, with Watson being a pioneer documentarian. At that point, they talk through the series episode by episode, regularly inviting guests to come on the podcast and discuss the found footage. In this way, you get to hear a lot of familiar voices, including my own. Although not under my own name. I was playing a character. And no, I'm not telling you which episode it was. The last we heard from Paul, the BBC were surveilling him and may have taken him captive, which is a disconcerting turn of events. I'm still hoping to hear that Paul is back home safe and sound. In the meantime, let's talk episode recommendations. I actually do recommend starting at the beginning with episode 1, just to get a sense of the show in general. As far as the found footage episodes go, I recommend season 5, episode 7, with Casey Hills, who's from a different podcast we'll cover at a later time. Casey fits in really well with the co-hosts, and it's just a very fun listen. And that's it for now. Back to Scott and Bert, and Happy 300th episode, gents.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was always under the impression that Sherlock Holmes was real.
Of course. Everyone knows that.
Not a shock here, right?
Huh. Well, I guess it shows you how effective the podcast has been since we all believe it.
There you go. But it is a fun and different show. And, anytime you get Paul Thomas Miller involved with something, it's going to be a little zany. And I guess you could say the same thing about our friend Brad Kefauver, too. So creative minds unite. I love it. And thank you, Madeline, for the kind wishes on our 300th anniversary here. I don't know about you, Bert, but I don't feel a day over 150. I
actually feel 301, actually. It's
You're a 301 redirect?
Yeah, I think
fantastic.
So. Yeah. My goal is to get to 404. If I can only get to 404, then I'll be somebody.
That'd be a good episode to end on. I like that.
Yeah. Episode 404.
iHo's 404.
Not found. Hey, well, you got the title already. Episode 404, not found. Yeah. That'll be easy.
Yeah.
Boy, that's going to be fun to record. Crickets. 50 minutes of crickets. Chirp, chirp.
As opposed to our usual show. Okay, everyone knows what that is. Yes, it's everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz program. It's Canonical Couplet, where we bring you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to test your Sherlockian knowledge against our meager poetry. If you were around here the last time, you remember we gave you this clue. When a man of questionable ethics lays his past bare, only photographic proof can spoil the affair. Bert, do you know which Sherlock Holmes story we were talking about here?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
boy.
That is a classic. It's the last recorded case of Sherlock Holmes on the eve of World War I. It's the story of a German spy who is stealing British cattle. And it's the case Watson called His Last Cow.
Oh, boy. That's a heifer of a joke. No, it was not his last cow, I'm afraid to say. No. Our friend Eric Deckers throws his hat into the ring. He says, aha, this one was easy, and I hardly had to rely on Google at all. This is the story of a German aristocrat who becomes a world-famous singer in a band called Königin, but is caught in a sex scandal that threatens his reputation. It's the story Watson called A Scandal in Bohemian Rhapsody. Except that sounds more like a fever dream I had. It's more likely to be A Scandal in Bohemia. Well, that's a wonderful guess, Eric, but I'm afraid... You and most of our correspondents fell into the same trap by guessing A Scandal in Bohemia. And in this case, we don't even need the spinning wheel because we only had one correct answer submitted by... who said... Oh, no, we got another one in under the wire. Okay, well, this is going to be a pretty small spinning wheel then. Let's see what number we land on.
1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2.
Red or black? Yes. It is number 1. And in that case, it goes to Douglas Vaughn.
Hooray!
Yes, Douglas guessed correctly that the answer is the illustrious client. Illustrious client this time. When a man of questionable ethics lays his past bare, only photographic proof can spoil the affair. Do you know? Well, I suppose that means that A Scandal in Bohemia is still out for another couplet. We used that in a past episode. My records show me that Douglas Vaughan won that one too.
Oh, really?
How appropriate. Well, then he seems to be entirely on point for winning this one because he's able to discern the two different stories in the canonical couplet. And if folks are wondering what the Scandal in Bohemia couplet sounded like, it was, when lovely woman to adventure stoops, she turns the wisest of us into dupes. So how do you like that? Well, we will have a copy of one of Stephen Lee's books off to you, Douglas. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, here is the canonical couplet for episode 300. Of a great evil, Holmes unearthed the root. The game was undeniably a foot. Foot. Well, how about we try that again? Of a great evil, Holmes unearthed the root. The game was undeniably afoot. If you know the answer to this episode's canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you are among all of the correct answers submitted and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. Stay tuned for a lovely item from our Sherlockian vaults here at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Well, Bert, we've wrapped November. We've finished episode 300.
Wow.
What do you suppose is next?
Well, Eternal Regret?
I was thinking episode 301.
Oh, episode 301.
Same difference.
It's always the simple answer, isn't it? I should have realized
Eternal Regret. Maybe that's the title of episode 301. Eternal Regret and Redirects. Redirects. Well, we will be back here with another fantastic guest, as we always do, here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Until that time, I am the completely redirected Scott Monty.
And I'm wondering what my motivation is. I've got to talk to the director. I'm Bert Walder.
And together, we say... The games of
foot.
The games of foot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.